Now for the next portion of the presentation, we'll look at course evals, and this is one of first of our 5 high-impact strategies. So when we say course evals, we're talking about those course evaluations that the students perform in class, may do online, may do it in class, but the key word here is perceptions. That's all they provide. They provide a perception from the students, whether they perceive you care, whether they perceive they were interested or engaged, and sometimes these have 25, 30 different questions. But our focus is just on a few of those core questions. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves with so much data that we get caught up in the data and it doesn't lead to action. So when we say we make data-driven, what usually you hear is data-driven decisions. We say data-driven action because not all decisions actually lead to action. So this statement's so true. The students buy into the teacher much more before they buy into the learning. This is especially true for your most at-risk students. That's the ones where perceptions matter the most because those are least likely to be motivated by the course content. Otherwise they wouldn't be most at risk. It's like getting students in an earth science class for non-science majors. And most of them aren't majoring in science for a reason. It's never clicked with them. It wasn't their favorite subject, whatever the case may be. So if we look at the number one reason students leave college, we'll see why we're addressing these course evals. Because according to the Center for Community College Student Engagement, it's that they do not feel connected. Now, I know you may say, well, on my withdrawal form at our institution, there's not a box for feel connected. There's not. There's a box for family problems or personal problems or financial problems, problems that may have been overcome had they felt more of a connection. So that's why the Center for Community College Student Engagement says this is the number one reason they do not leave college. So since we actually assess their feelings or their perceptions, then the real question is what do we do with that assessment? Does SACS require this assessment? And not per se, although we use that assessment to meet some of the SACS requirements. But SACS absolutely does not require any plan of action for improvement based on these course evaluations. That's just something we should do. All we're saying is the accrediting agency may or may not require it, but we're not going by the low bar set by accrediting agencies. We're going by the basic fundamental foundation of education, those basic evidence-based proven strategies that increase learning. Because we know that the increases in learning come when positive perceptions are improved. And this is for all students. It improves learning for all students, but up to 5 times more for your least prepared students. It's very similar to coming up with simple things that we may do or you may agree to do as a total faculty. At one institution, what we said, teachers are give forms that tell students what they need to be able to do and not to do. We'll call them student responsibility sheets. It may be in the form of a syllabus, but wherever it lists out these responsibilities for students, we must follow that with responsibilities for us. What can the student expect from the teacher? We're very good at telling them what we can expect of them, but when we show what they can expect from us, it creates a very dynamic two-way street in the classroom, a very collaborative type environment in the classroom. That's another reason for carving out 5 or 6 hours a week and calling them student hours instead of just office hours. Because, see, we know the perception with office hours is that students perceive this time as when you're grading papers, working on another class, especially if a low-income first-generation student walks up to the door that says Dr. So-and-so or Professor So-and-so, and they're going to knock on this door that's closed with the blinds shut and ask a question that they already feel may be a stupid question. That's not realistic to think. So does it improve perceptions if this is a time that student does not need an appointment? The only rule is the door's not shut and the blinds aren't closed. They can come up at any time during this time, and that time is for them. Once again, addressing perceptions in the classroom. Most common incentive for actually performing these course evals, because that's another concern nationally, is the response rate on these course evaluations. So the most common across for colleges, universities all across the nation are bonus points. Getting them to do what they need to do but don't want to do. We actually looked at this like a classroom leadership problem. If we have very low response rates, which means we're not getting the students to do that which they need to do but don't want to do, then how are we getting them to do all that other stuff in class they need to do but don't want to do? Now, I was amazed that only about 1/5 of faculty They weren't even allowed their own data. They don't even know what the data was on the course evaluations. First generation students, they have issues of their own. They don't come with the highest degree of confidence sometimes. They tend to feel as if they don't belong. They have a very high pressure to succeed. First generation, no one in their family has been to college. Maybe no one within a rock throw of their house has ever set foot on a college campus. Where are they going to go for support and encouragement? And of course, they should get that from the classroom. That lack of confidence and the high pressure sometimes lead to that self-fulfilling dropouts. That's why that statistic we saw where the first withdrawal or failure, completion rates cut in half. Because what happened on that first withdrawal or failure, it reinforces what they already think of themselves in terms of academic success. So we go back to that other saying that make a connection with just 3 folks on campus, rate of completion doubles. And quite frankly, just 3 is a pretty low bar. They should be making a connection with virtually all faculty on campus. A good quote. It's a good quote because, you ever wonder why some teachers seem like they can get away with just about anything while other teachers get criticized for every little thing from the students, that is. And when you see incident like that, it's not about the details. It's usually something basic, and usually it's human relations. Human relations is the one most common denominator among all great teachers. So the students work harder for those they respect. The way you get to respect them is you respect them first. Respect's like a yo-yo. You can't receive it until it's put out there, and putting it out is what gets it back. That's why we hate when people say things like, well, anyone can teach. But quite frankly, we're our own worst enemy in this case. Because if we approach teaching as if anyone could teach, then we could see why someone would say that. Anyone can get up and talk about what they're good at. Anyone can get up and discuss what they're knowledgeable on. But can anyone inspire and facilitate learning with a diverse group of students? And of course, we know the answer to that is no. Only professional educators could do that. So something to keep in mind when we're working with these students and gaining this respect is we always praise in public, but we censor in private. We don't call them out in front of the class. So that's just a little tip that would help. Because these course evaluations are the requirement of the accrediting agency. We've already said not per se, although almost all colleges use them to meet some of those requirements. The vast majority of colleges give those end of term. You may say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, you eliminate the feedback from those we need it from the most, which are those that have withdrawn. And sadly to say, there's some courses that still have 30, 40, 50% withdrawal rates. We're losing that information from students we need it from the most. We had a response rate went from 28% to 67% in the institution, and it did that because there was an emphasis put on response rates. Once we put an emphasis on something, and that data is recorded on the faculty's performance dashboard, so they can clearly see every semester whether they're making improvements or not. The 28% response rate, which happens to be the national average for online course evaluations, is much too low to be valid. So we started asking the questions. If a response rate is that low, who do you think is going to be filling out these course evaluations? Maybe those that have the biggest beef with the teacher, the biggest complaints. So the larger we can make that number, the more valid the survey becomes. And plus, those perceptions, by the way, are the easiest to change in the classroom. Not only are they easiest to change, they lead to the most immediate improvements in positive perceptions. We've seen this occur in science divisions where perception was addressed before any other instructional strategies. And when teachers saw test scores going up 6, 7, 8 points on average, the lectures have not changed, the tests have not changed, that's when you started getting more buy-in. So that just reinforces the point. You don't need buy-in up front. Buy-in up front comes from those top faculty who are already doing these active learning strategies. Your middle group, they can get buy-in with a little encouragement and participation. And then you may have a bottom group that may not ever get buy-in. But the way to get increased buy-in is to get increased participation in effective strategies. When faculty realize they work, they realize the students are more satisfied, they're learning more, then we get the buy-in. Now, key here is we do not use these to evaluate faculty. The agreement is faculty will use them to evaluate themselves. And as long as they're doing that, we're not using them to evaluate faculty. Now, a word of warning, when you first initially read these course evals, that's not the time to be writing an action plan on what you're going to do to improve. That's the time to go ahead and vent, get rid of all your defensive reactions, talk about the students that said wonderful things. They're the smartest students, and those that didn't, well, they really didn't know what they were talking about. They were just mad because they wasn't passing the class, whatever venting you need to do, get that out of the way. And then come back in with a new hat on. Drink yourself a margarita, do whatever you need to do, come in with that new hat on, and that new hat is the hat saying, what can I do to improve perceptions? So we evaluate faculty on how well they come up with an action plan. You came up with an action plan, you implemented it, you're doing great. That's all we can expect from someone, those action plans for improvement. So if we ask, is 28% good, you may say, well, we just said that 28% was the national average. So no, average is not good. Average is average. Another thing we look down these course evals is the fact when we started these at an institution, before we even addressed any of the perceptions, there was a 96% agrees and strongly agrees on question that required positive response. So we're asking, was that good? And if somebody in the public called and said they wanted to see some of our data, we would probably send them the 96 agree and strongly agree, showing that 96% of our students agreed with a certain statement. However, when we sit down to the table to improve, 96% doesn't even have enough room for improvement. So statistically, we wouldn't even want to use that number. Because if we had an instructor that had 16% agree and 80 strongly agree, versus an instructor vice versa had 80 agree and 16 strongly agree, there would be a noticeable difference in these two instructors. You probably wouldn't have to spend 10 or 15 minutes in class. You could pick out which one was which. So when it comes down to improvement, we focused on the strongly agrees. Strongly agree average was 71% when we started. So that gave room for improvement. So when we sit down to the table to improve, we put that new hat of improvement on and say, what can I do to improve perceptions? We're looking at that 71% strongly agree. And in every semester, we monitor the growth in that. Now, one of the biggest questions we had, we pulled out caring as the number one question. On the performance dashboard for faculty, that particular question counted double because we wanted to make sure we knew that students would know we cared, whether they passed, didn't pass, liked some things, didn't like some things. In the end, we couldn't mess this one up. Students had to know we cared. We started off with a warm, positive welcome statement or a welcome video on a learning management system. And when you first start with these, you say put out a warm, positive welcome statement. Sometimes you have to spot check them just to see what they look like. We spot checked a couple and had to send an email and said, would you revisit your welcome statement and try to warm it up a little bit? And both responses were pretty much the same that said, well, I read my welcome statement and I didn't see anything negative about it. So this is a point here of how do you take it to the next level. When you're writing a warm, positive statement, that does not mean don't write a negative statement. It means write a positive one. There is a difference. So we had to get that point across because most classroom management issues, quite frankly, very seldom have to do with a specific incident at hand. It has to do with a relationship issue. So by addressing positive perceptions, we're also improving classroom management skills. So to determine what questions to focus on, once again, we don't want to overwhelm ourselves with so much data from 30-something questions. Let's just focus on the key questions to start with. We told you the caring question, that counted double. And then you got to have a question on engagement. We expect them to be engaged in the learning process. So we want to know, do they feel like they were engaged in the process? And absolutely we want to know, did the instructor maintain their enthusiasm? Enthusiasm is one of those top qualities in a leader. And once again, we say leader, you think teacher, one and the same. Reminds me of Coach Lombardi from the Green Bay Packers back in the 60s. Took over Green Bay Packers, and one thing he said is, we will be fired up with enthusiasm. Or you'll be fired with enthusiasm. So it was just making the point of how important that particular aspect was. And then we used the word interesting. Could have used relevant, but trying to keep it simple for students. Was the information and content interesting to you? Relevant. And then our last question we looked at was the yes or no question. And it was, after it's all said and done, do you recommend this instructor or not? Yes or no question. Now that may make you think, what if I had 50% yeses? Would that be good? What if I had 75%? Would that be good? What about 90 or 95%? point is, if all we have is our data, we may not know what's good. I may think 50% is good till I realize my divisional average was 80%. Then I would know not only is it not good, it's well below average, probably terrible. So it's kind of a relative term. Would 75% be good? I would think it would be. 3/4 of the students recommend me, until I realized that the divisional average was over 90%. So a lot of faculty, when they're doing course evals, what they will do is, like we said, most institutions do these end of term. Some institutions, the very few, have moved them to midterm to try to capture those withdrawals before they leave. But no matter when it's given, what a lot of faculty will do, especially really sharp ones, they'll give their own course eval. It may only be 4 or 5 questions, and they'll usually give that after the first exam. Give it after the first major exam. And here's the key. If you give those and let students fill them out, you go home and read them. The next day in class, make sure you implement something in response to what they're saying. When students realize, number one, you actually read them, and number two, you cared enough to actually change what you're doing in the class, you say, well, I noticed a lot of students said so-and-so. So what we're going to do, we're going to do it a little different today. We're going to try to incorporate some of that in today's lesson to show them that you're responding to their needs. The whole purpose is to build those relationships in class, because that's what great teachers focus on, are those relationships. Because they realize if we're talking about learning, no significant learning can occur without those significant relationships. Very powerful. Because the whole point of this is, if we're showing students how to be successful, both academically and successful in class. But to carry it to another level, we sure wouldn't want them leaving our class not even knowing the key to happiness. So the key to happiness is gratitude. The more thankful people are, the happier they are. And you could see that in this article. So to promote the happiness and well-being and health and optimism and energy and enthusiasm, we need to know what their perceptions are, so we can change our behavior in response to that. So for course evals, what you're going to do now is look at the list of those 9 problems that we started this workshop with, and then write an E for evaluations beside each problem that could be helped by improving positive perceptions of the learning environment, by using course evals to improve those perceptions.